Hi, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4.2 demo for the piece I call Intergalactic Buckaroo. Now this was the piece I did right after the Hellboy piece, so I wanted to take a lot of those techniques and do it again, but try to tweak certain things and just try to, just do it differently with different circumstances. And I had this drawing from a real long time ago. I drew this at a sketch bomb in San Francisco a long time ago, and I always wanted to color it and never got around to it, so I thought, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. But what I really wanted to do is I wanted to give it this sort of like space acid, I don't know, like 80s indie comic about space cowboys type feel. I wanted the colors to be really loud, and I wanted them to be absurd, like the idea that just because people are in space now, they've got like blue hair and they wear a red hat and they're just loud colors and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I wanted to do, and then I used an almost the exact same but slightly different color palette to the Hellboy one in regards to the shadows and the lighting. And the techniques here are almost all the same, but I'm dealing with different problems. For instance, with Hellboy, he's just the head. He's the physical head with the shoulders and the neck and all that kind of stuff. Here we've got that same setup, except we've also got some metal, we've got some leather, we've got the glass around his head, we've got the smoke inside. So there's different things here, different challenges, so trying to prove the method from before but under different circumstances. In some ways I think this piece is less effective than the Hellboy one, but in other ways I thought that the challenges that were presented sort of stress tested it better. There'll be some future videos covering, if you watch my YouTube channel, if you watch my Instagram page, the sort of zombie girl that I recently did, where I'm taking some of these methods and I'm taking them further. So let's just stop with the explanation and get into what's going on here. This is the select paint, select clear method using the one shadow layer. It's very similar to the way that I did the Hellboy one, where there's going to be a couple of those shadow layers in order to make sure that I'm giving the form. So there's a shadow layer on top of everything, and then I'm starting from my bottom layer up, and I'm selecting the contents of that layer and then painting the shadows on the shadow layer, then going to the next layer up in my flat stack, selecting that and then clearing it in case there was any kind of overlap with the shapes, and then reselecting it again and painting on the shadow layer, and then just sort of moving through everything. So if you want to not use those terms and just think of it as I'm doing like the thing on the bottom, but when I paint the thing on the bottom on the top, I'm going to overlap all of this stuff. And so then when I get the next layer up, I clear it and then paint, and then clear it and then paint, and so that by then when you're done with everything and you've gone through all those layers, theoretically you've deleted any paint in that process that's overlapping weirdly, and then you've painted the correct paint. Was that confusing? Sorry, sometimes it is confusing. If you go down in the description, I should have a video that's called Select Paint, Select Clear linked, and if you follow that, that's a much simpler environment where I sort of show these methodologies. And then taking those methodologies, you can see how by layering on complexity, it can still remain effective, but it just becomes harder to manage overall. Now that the shadow pass, the first shadow pass is complete, I go back to my flats and I start making sure that some of those local color changes have been done. So for instance, the blush in the nose, the blush in the ears, the darkening around the eyes, the 5 o'clock shadow, and just make sure all of those are put in there. Now I'm adding in the more pronounced little sprigs of hair, little thicker bits of hair, and that is all done underneath everything so that those shadows are still impacting everything the correct way. Now we move into the next shadow layer, where I'm adding in some more detail and some sort of ambient occlusion. It's not as disciplined as that. It's more just about adding extra emphasis where I need it and extra rounding out of some of the shapes. But I'm going through all the layers in the exact same fashion on a new layer that's on top of the other shadow layer. All set. I should point that out. It's all set to multiply. I don't know why I didn't point that out sooner, but these are sort of like light tan colors that have been set to multiply so that they darken everything that's underneath them, and no matter what you change underneath, it will darken appropriately. And now we're going to add in some texture onto the metal part. This is me just, and the hat, this is me just sort of putting it into like one big fat plane and then warping it so that it fits what I need. They're set to either overlay or maybe multiply or maybe soft light. It sort of depends on the material and how it's going. Now we shift into the highlight section. I shouldn't call it a highlight, it's more like a brighter than mid-tone, because technically like a super highlight would be like the glint in the eyes, which will be saved for later. Because he's in a mostly green environment, this is a greenish highlight, and I think it's sort of like a brighter green and slightly desaturated and slightly blue, and then that whole thing is set to overlay so that everything underneath it reacts accurately. That's sort of the whole idea with these last couple pieces and some of the pieces that you're going to see in the future. I have used this method many times in the past for even things like a video most of you probably know, the Grigori piece. These are the methods that are being used. The only difference here is that I'm not using the lines to support the piece, and I'm trying to be really cognizant of my light color and my shadow color, as opposed to just using a general generic lighting, because it's like a a character sheet or something. This is in an environment, so I'm trying to be as aware of that as possible and make all of those color choices, the lighting and the shadows, make sense within that context. So now we're going to add a cast shadow from the face onto the smoke behind the face, and the hat onto the head, and the hat onto the smoke, just trying to get all of that cast shadow in there. I add this reflection into the glass that I thought would be a really good idea, and you'll see it sticks around in the piece for a while, but then I eventually get rid of it because it's kind of just information noise. Here I put, you saw fly by a bunch of shines, and I put the glint, or not the glint, sorry, I put the ash, the lit ash, the ember on the cigarette in. Now here I'm tweaking some of the glass around the head so that the white isn't there because it's not catching that light like it is in the lower part. The hat's blocking it. And now here's a little bit of bounce from the background. You can see I've got the background switched to a purple up in the corner because I wanted to add a little bit more complexity back there, but I ended up disliking that, and I'll change it back, and I'll change that rim light eventually too, right there. Then there's the highlight on the glass, the highlight on the eye, all following that sort of greenish thing because that is the key light from the environment. And then the shoulder pads and his like sheriff's badge here, I knew that I wanted to blur both of them because I wanted to create a bit of a rack focus, and that is why I don't put a lot of work into this. It's going to be blurred, so who really cares? So what we're dealing with here then is a warm shadow and a green highlight. and trying to just keep track of where all those highlights should be and where all the reflection in the material should be captured as accurately as I can. We've got a little bit of sort of space smoke in there as well, and it's basically starting to wrap up here. At the end, we just changed that smoke to a green to reduce some of the visual complexity a little bit further, and that is the completed piece. It's just as obnoxious and loud as I wanted it to be, and it sort of stress tests the technique a little bit more, so I'm happy with the way this one came out. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.